The sun was setting over the red hills, painting the sky in colors of fire and gold. A cold wind ran across the wide plains carrying dust and silence. Near the river, a lonely man stood with his coat torn and hat tilted low. His name was Samuel Reed, a drifter who had spent years moving from one lonely town to another. People said he came from the east after losing everything in a mine collapse. He never spoke about it, and no one dared to ask. He had built a small cabin near the edge of the reservation lands where white men rarely went. The locals whispered that he was not afraid of anything, not even death. He worked hard, repaired his roof, caught fish, hunted his food, and sometimes helped travelers who got lost in the desert. He never smiled, never asked for help, and always stood straight like a man who carried a heavy past on his shoulders. One evening, when he went to trade supplies in a nearby town, he found the place tense. A local rancher named Clint Morgan was shouting in front of the saloon. Clint was known for his pride and cruelty. He had insulted one of the native warriors earlier that day, calling them thieves and liars. The native, a young man named Dakota, stood still, holding his anger behind his dark eyes. Samuel saw the fire in the young man's look and knew trouble was coming. The sheriff tried to calm them down, but Clint mocked Dakota again and spat near his boots. Words turned into challenge, and in the old way of the West, there was only one answer: a duel of honor. But before the time was set, Clint backed out. "I don't waste bullets on savages," he said loudly, and the crowd laughed. Dakota's pride was crushed, his people watching from a distance, their heads bowed. Samuel couldn't bear the sight. He knew what it felt like to be humiliated before others. He stepped forward and said in a calm voice, "Then duel with me. A man who insults another and then hides is no man at all." The saloon went silent. Clint's face turned red with anger and shame. "Fine, old fool," he barked. "At dawn tomorrow, behind the corral." That night Samuel sat by his fire, sharpening his knife, though he would only need his gun. He thought about the faces he had lost years ago, his wife and little boy taken by fever. He had nothing left in this world, and if this was how it ended, he didn't care. But deep inside, something told him this was not just about him. It was about standing up for those who couldn't. At dawn, the town gathered. The air was heavy, cold, and still. The sheriff held a handkerchief between his fingers, ready to drop it. Clint stood tall, dressed in a fancy coat, his silver gun shining. Samuel's revolver looked old, but his hand was steady. Dakota and a few natives stood near the fence, watching in silence. When the sheriff dropped the cloth, both men moved. Clint's hand trembled. Samuel's did not. One gunshot echoed across the valley. A bird flew away from a nearby tree. Clint fell, his gun dropping beside him. Samuel didn't look proud or happy. He just lowered his arm and looked toward Dakota, giving him a small nod of respect. The sheriff confirmed what everyone knew. It was fair. Clint's men were angry, but no one dared to say a word. The duel was lawful, and Samuel had done nothing wrong. Still, he knew he couldn't stay in town long. He packed his things and returned to his cabin near the hills, the wind at his back. That evening, as he cleaned his revolver, he heard horses outside. When he stepped out, a group of native warriors sat waiting. Their leader was a tall, older man with a deep voice and eyes that carried wisdom. It was Chief Red Elk, the father of Dakota. Samuel placed his gun aside and bowed his head slightly, showing respect. The chief spoke slowly through a translator, but Samuel understood much of it. "You fought with honor," the chief said. "You did not fight for yourself but for respect. That is the way of a true warrior." Samuel said quietly, "No man should stand alone against shame. I only did what was right." The chief nodded, and one of his men brought forward a young woman. She was quiet, graceful, and her eyes carried both strength and kindness. Her name was Naya, the chief's only daughter. She looked at Samuel not with fear but with curiosity, as if trying to read the man who stood before her. Dusty and tired but proud. The chief said something more, and the translator hesitated, then spoke. "Our tribe does not forget honor. You defended one of our own. You are now a friend of the people. The chief offers his daughter's hand if you accept as a bond between your world and ours." Samuel stood still, shocked. He looked at Naya. She lowered her eyes, her hands folded in front of her. He had not spoken to a woman in years, not since his family's death. He didn't know what to say. "I'm no man of wealth or tribe," he said softly. "I live quiet with nothing but this land." The chief smiled faintly. "A man's heart is worth more than gold," he said through his translator. My daughter will not live rich, but she will live with honor. Samuel didn't answer right away. He looked toward the sunset again, the same one that had burned over his losses years ago. He thought of his loneliness, the empty nights, the long winters where only the wind spoke to him. And then he looked at Naya again, her calm, steady gaze, her soft voice when she finally spoke. You fought not to win, she said, but to make right what was wrong. My father is wise. I will not be unhappy beside such a man. The world seemed to grow quiet around them. Samuel nodded slowly, unsure what the future held, but feeling something stir in his chest for the first time in years. A sense of belonging, of peace. The chief and his men left before sunset, leaving Naya with Samuel. She helped him gather wood, made a small fire near the cabin, and sang softly in her language as the stars came out. Samuel sat beside her, listening, not understanding the words but feeling the warmth in them. That night, for the first time in many years, he did not feel alone. The fire burned gently, the wind whispered through the pines, and he watched the stars through the open door. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, maybe trouble, maybe change, but something inside him had already begun to heal. In that quiet valley under the western sky, a man who had once lost everything had found something he never expected, a reason to keep living, and the beginning of a story that would soon spread through every camp and town for miles around. Morning came quiet and cold. The first light touched the lonely cabin walls, and smoke rose from the small fire Naya had kept through the night. Samuel woke to the smell of roasted corn and herbs. He watched her move about the cabin with calm care, her long dark hair tied back with a strip of red cloth. She greeted him softly, her accent gentle. You should eat, she said. The day will be long. He nodded and sat down beside the small wooden table. It had been years since someone had cooked for him. The food was simple but warm, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a man only surviving. He felt alive again. Naya spoke little, but her presence filled the silence in ways words never could. By midday, a few men from her tribe returned. They came to escort both of them to the chief's camp for a gathering. Samuel saddled his old horse while Naya rode beside him on a painted mare. The wind carried the smell of pine and wildflowers as they rode across the valley. When they reached the camp, hundreds of tents stood in neat rows. Children played, women ground corn, and warriors repaired arrows and saddles. Samuel saw faces turned toward him, some curious, some cold. Not all were happy that the chief had offered his daughter to an outsider. The chief greeted them at the center fire. You came, he said. That shows courage. But courage must live not only in a man's hand, but also in his heart. Samuel nodded, not understanding everything, but feeling the weight of the words. Later that evening, the chief called the council together. Around the fire, the tribe elders spoke. Some said the man had acted with honor. Others said he did not belong. A tall warrior named Koda stepped forward. He was Naya's childhood friend, strong and proud, and his voice carried anger. He is not of our blood, Koda said. He will never understand our ways. If he stays, he must prove his worth. The chief turned to Samuel and translated. They ask for proof, not of fight but of spirit. You will hunt with our best men at dawn. If you bring back life to the camp, you will be one of us. Samuel simply said, I understand. That night, Naya sat beside the fire outside their tent. She looked at him quietly. You should not have to do this, she whispered. You already risked your life once. Samuel smiled faintly. A man must earn his place no matter where he stands, he said. Besides, I've hunted before. I'll come back. She looked down, her fingers playing with the necklace around her neck. If you don't, she said softly, the fire will burn cold. He didn't answer, but he reached out and touched her hand for a moment, just enough to promise he would try. At dawn, the forest waited, dark and full of mist. The hunting group rode out, Koda, Takota, and 3 other men. They carried bows while Samuel held his rifle. The path was steep, filled with thorns and hidden streams. Birds cried overhead, and somewhere far off a wolf howled. For hours they tracked signs of elk. Samuel moved carefully, his eyes sharp from years of living alone in wild country. When he finally saw the large bull through the trees, he signaled quietly. The others prepared their bows. Koda glanced at him coldly, perhaps hoping the stranger would miss. Samuel took a breath, lifted his rifle, and fired. The shot rang through the hills. The elk fell cleanly. Silence followed, then murmurs of surprise. Even Koda couldn't hide his respect. He walked to the fallen animal and touched its side, nodding slightly. "Your hand is true," he said. They tied the elk and brought it back to camp by sunset. The people gathered to see. When they arrived, Naya stood waiting, eyes bright with relief. The chief smiled and raised his hand. "The hunt is sacred," he said. "This man has brought us life. He has earned his place among us." There was cheering and drumming that night. The tribe danced, their songs echoing through the valley. Naya joined in, her face glowing in the firelight. Samuel watched quietly, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. It had been so long since he had seen joy this pure. Later, as the music faded and stars filled the sky, the chief approached Samuel. "Tomorrow the spirits will witness your bond with my daughter," he said. "If you wish to walk away, you can still do so now. But if you stay, you become one of us forever." Samuel looked toward Naya, who stood by the fire speaking with the women. He remembered all the years he had lived alone, the nights filled with silence, the faces of his lost family haunting his sleep. Then he looked at her again, a symbol of peace and a new beginning. "I'll stay," he said quietly. "This is where I belong." The next morning the ceremony took place by the river. The elders gathered, and Naya stood dressed in soft deer skin, her hair braided with feathers. Samuel wore a simple shirt, freshly washed, and a belt given by the chief himself. They faced each other as the chief lifted his hand toward the sky, speaking in his native tongue. When the ritual ended, the chief placed their hands together and said, "Two hearts, one path. May the Great Spirit see them walk as one." The crowd cheered. Naya looked at Samuel with shy eyes, but a small smile curved her lips. He felt his heart beat in a way he had almost forgotten. Days passed and peace settled in the valley. Samuel built a stronger cabin with help from the tribe. He hunted, traded, and learned their language. The children liked him, and even Koda began to treat him as a brother. At night, he and Naya sat by the fire sharing stories, his about the mountains and storms he had faced, hers about her people and the old legends of the stars. One evening, as they walked near the river, Naya said, "My father told me you once had a family." Samuel nodded. "Long ago," he said quietly. "I thought the world had taken everything from me." She touched his hand. "It gave you another chance," she said. "Sometimes loss brings the road to something new." He looked at her, realizing how true her words were. In her presence, the loneliness that had haunted him began to fade. He felt whole again, not because of the land or the peace, but because someone finally shared the silence with him. But peace in the West never lasted long. One morning, riders came from the town, men loyal to Clint Morgan's family. They wanted revenge for his death. They threatened to burn the camp and take Samuel to face judgment. The chief stood firm, saying Samuel had acted with honor and that the duel had been lawful. But the men would not listen. Guns were drawn and the standoff grew tense. Samuel stepped forward, raising his voice. "If you want me," he said, "take me, but leave them alone." Naya cried out, trying to stop him, but the chief placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let him speak," he said. Samuel walked toward the men slowly, his hands raised. "I fought your man fair. If you want another duel, I'll give it." The leader sneered. "You'll lose this time." Before anyone could fire, the chief's warriors surrounded the intruders, bows ready. The leader saw the numbers against him and hesitated. Samuel stepped closer, his voice calm. "No more blood. Leave this valley. Tell your people I'm no longer part of your world." After a long silence, the riders turned and left, angry but defeated. The tribe cheered as they disappeared over the ridge. Samuel turned back, his face tired but peaceful. Naya ran to him and threw her arms around him, her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I'd lost you again," she whispered. He smiled, resting his hand on her head. "You can't lose what's already found its place," he said. From that day, he became known among the tribe as the Silent Warrior, the man who fought without hate and loved without fear. The chief often said that the spirits had brought him to their valley for a reason. Years later, travelers who passed through the land spoke of a quiet man and a beautiful native woman who lived near the river, always together, always kind to those in need. They said the man never raised his gun again. He didn't need to. His peace was already won. And when the wind moved through the trees on cold nights, it carried their laughter, soft, warm, and endless, like the sound of two hearts that had finally found home.